Hello and welcome to our Ikigai for All webinar. So this is a subject so close to my heart. I really believe that it's so important that people love where they're working and enjoy their work. I often think of the Mary Oliver quote, which is, "What are you going to do with your one wild and precious life?" And we all spend so much time at work. I think it's so important to have that as part of our joyfulness. For me at London Speech Workshop, it gives me insane amounts of pleasure to have a team of people who are truly happy and joyful. And it wasn't always that way. About 8 years ago, I really didn't have that. And I realized in this sort of epiphany moment that it's so important for us doing good in the world to make sure that what we're doing internally is a reflection of all the work we're doing externally. So we now have that culture, and I'm really excited to share some of our tools and communication tools as well as more general ones with you today. But also I'm so excited to be welcoming and discussing this with Geraghty from the Culture Consultancy, her work is all about evolving and transforming culture, which not only maximizes growth, but it also maximizes well-being. So I'll introduce Jo, if you come on board to share your story a little. Hi, Jo.
Hi, thanks so much, Emma. That's a lovely introduction. Yes, I'm Jo Geraghty, co-founder and director of Culture Consultancy. As it pretty much says on the tin, and as you've explained, Emma, we do end-to-end culture change programs. We upskill leaders and managers, and we help build those workforces and work environments, whether that's hybrid or remote or in the office, that people really want to belong to and be a part of, and that drives business success and is great for the people that are working there.
I love that. I love this idea of like people really want to work there, because that's the bit. And actually what's beautiful is it's not some magic fairy dust that some companies have and some don't. Actually, it can be put in very mindfully into a company. So I'm very excited to have you here today and to be sharing actually some really strong, powerful tools, both from the macro and the micro in this webinar. So without further ado, we're now going to launch into our questions. We've got 4 or so set questions, and then there'll be time for everyone at the end to we'll do some Q&A as well. So can we bring up the first question, please? So what are the most effective strategies to resolve conflicts at work without coming across as weak, while still maintaining authenticity and psychological safety? So this is a really interesting one. I'll kick off with an answer from sort of our maybe more micro perspective and then hand over to you, Jo. From us, it's really important to find a space of what we refer to as like warmth and gravitas, this lovely middle ground between being too strong on the one hand or too assertive and too passive on the other. And I think it's really important. We've got a lovely tool called 5 Perspectives. And it basically says that there are 2 unhelpful perspectives, 3 helpful ones. So the 2 unhelpful ones, one of them is, I'm right, you're wrong. And that's where us being too assertive lies. So that would be, all the pushy stuff. You must do this, you can't do that, you never do this. Equally, you've got the I'm wrong, you're right perspective. And that's where we can go into that weak space of like, I'm so sorry. Would you mind possibly doing X, Y, Z? All that sort of back-fitting language that we use. And so actually what we want to get to is a space where we can do the 3 helpful perspectives, basically. So it's observation, I observe. So this is what's happening. Then it's I ask, so I'm curious in the curious perspective. So what's going on with you? And the I share or I feel perspective. This is what's going on for me. So from our perspective, using the word perspective again, but from where we're sitting in terms of how to deal with sort of difficult situations at work, you want to use those 3 spaces of observation. These are the facts of the situation. This is without judgment, without evaluation. And then move from there to what's your perspective? What's going on from you? That curiosity is so powerful for bringing in a space of like, right, we can get to a positive outcome that works for everybody, because I'm respecting you. I'm actually here to listen to what you have to say. And then there's the I feel or I share my perspective. So that's me going, okay, this is how this conflict that's happening, this is how it's impacting me. So we've got this tool that pulls that together, which is called COAST. COAST is connect. So if you've got a conflict, you start by connecting, and that connection might be as simple as how are you, or thank you for being here. Then you do the observation. So that's the O of COAST, is observation. So that's this is what's happened, XYZ, very clean language. Then it's ask, what's your perspective on it? What's your experience? Share, this is the impact for me. And then you do T, which is take forward. So now let's resolve it. So that's a kind of micro tool. We've got sort of many more, but that's one that I think is very powerful. What about from your I want to say perspective the whole time now, but from you, Jo, how would you approach that question?
I'll tell you what I like about that, Emma, is it's very much a sort of starting from a place of understanding. There's what's the context? How can I understand? And we do something quite similar, even though, as you would say, it's on a macro scale. So our piece of understanding is really auditing the culture. So understanding where might those conflicts be coming from? Are there conflicts for a start? Not all organizations have that, but are there conflicts? Are there tensions? Where are they coming from? And there's different things that come out of that. Sometimes it might be that there is leadership misalignment, and once that top team's misaligned, their teams underneath them tend to sort of form silos, and there's disconnect and miscommunication, all sorts of things that happen underneath. Or it could be in much more of a sort of one-to-one situation where good constructive feedback is not being given. There's not that clarity for people, and we see this happen a lot. This is something that's happened for the whole sort of 30 years that I've been working, I think, but we see it a lot where it's not happening. It doesn't get dealt with in a timely fashion. The tension builds up, and that's where the conflict comes in. We had a client recently where they were having lots of grievances raised internally, and actually when we delved into what was going on underneath the surface, it was really that. It was about weak communication, weak feedback, not happening real time, and therefore and a lack of psychological safety. So not feeling like they could talk to their manager about it, and therefore it had to go down an HR route, which seems ridiculous. It wasn't really necessary. What was needed was those real time comms. Another thing that might come out is sort of cross-cultural differences. So this is an interesting one with conflict, actually, because we're working with an African organisation at the moment that, from a cultural perspective, from a national cultural perspective, really prioritise harmony in the workplace. And so, it's all about peace and getting on and, moving things forward. But there's really no way that they want to be giving that kind of direct feedback or causing anything that seems like conflict. It's just countercultural. So sometimes you get things like that, again, you would use your tools, but maybe in a slightly different way to navigate.
I love that, because actually it's really interesting, because this question is obviously like, well, it's very direct, like how do we resolve conflict and find that line of warmth and gravitas, essentially. But actually that macro is, well, let's understand the nature of the conflict. Like, let's, our tools go in, it's like, regardless of the conflict, here's what you do. And yours like, actually, let's get a temperature check on the culture, on that company. Let's do that auditing. Which is so interesting. I think just to crack into that a bit more. So, like, what is the auditing process? Like, and what are you looking for in it?
Well, lots of different things. So a full culture audit is quite extensive. We're looking at it on different layers. So we're very much looking at a leadership, a manager layer, a sort of what we call a frontline staff layer, and then maybe an external view as well. So there might be a customer perspective, the regulator, other shareholders, other external views in there, and really an understanding on lots of different aspects of that. Is the definition of the culture clearly articulated and understood? Is the culture aligned throughout the organization? Is there one sort of piece of red thread that's running throughout that is clearly understood by everybody? Do managers and leaders have the skills and capabilities that they need to drive that culture forward? When I think of culture, I don't think of something sort of very abstract or necessarily kind of easily good or bad. You know, people are very much like, oh, this is toxic and this is excellent. It tends not to be the case. You know, culture is really, it needs to be aligned to your strategy. So it's a way of operationalizing or mobilizing your people to make your strategy come to life. So you can have a great culture, but it might not be serving you very well from a business perspective. And again, that causes a disconnect. People kind of going, why are we doing this? And then, you know, could be other forms of conflict internally. So we're looking at everything, how decisions get made, how people interact, communications, leadership styles, etc. So lots of aspects of that.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I guess with the different kinds of conflict, there's going to be, you know, like the seed underlying the conflict, there are going to be different approaches to how we deal with it. And, you know, the same for us. So we've got the COAST tool, which actually is pretty universal and it's very powerful as a tool. However, what you may also need is the visionary leadership. So how does someone share their vision in order to get that alignment, to make sure that everybody's kind of on point and singing from the same hymn sheet? And so it's like those reasons for being out of alignment can lead to conflict, and it's different kinds of, or like you say, it could be a culture, you know, cross-cultural. Really interesting. I love that. I think let's go on to the next question.
Perfect.
So what are the most important qualities that a leader needs to have in the modern workplace? So how about you start with this and I'll follow up you.
Yeah, this is a good one. I think in some ways, as you were just saying, so in some ways, I think leadership hasn't changed over the last few years, and there are some key pieces that still stand true. So having that vision for a start and being able to engage your people to come with you on the journey. You know, too many times you see people with a vision that they can't express or can't explain or articulate or sort of pull people into following. It's, you know, so there's still that. There's still the sort of, we expect them to have the right business strategy. We want them to be authentic in their leadership style. We want them to have strong ethics in their decision making. And so there's these pieces. But I think what I see now shifting really is this kind of, it's the pace, you know, I mean, you'll hear it probably on every webinar, on every topic, but the pace of change that we're in currently just requires slightly different skills and attributes. And some of those are things like, you know, the sense of, you know, building adaptability and resilience, right? Just being able to manage that pace of change, be able to respond to whatever is thrown at us. And we've had a few things thrown at us over the last few years, right? So whatever is thrown at us, how can we respond to that? It's not an easy one to practice actually as a skill. So we recently ran, we took a team of leaders to a fully kitted out spaceship in South London, and we put them through a number of missions where they literally had to, you know, I mean, in that instance, it was more like asteroids flying towards them. It's not quite, you know, how to deal with a global pandemic or a financial crisis, but it kind of builds the psychological muscle for how do you react? How do you adapt? How can you maneuver in those situations? Another key skill is really, and I think it's one of the ones that people sort of don't think is important in an age where we're moving to AI so strongly and AI agents working alongside human beings, but the focus on being more human and understanding the human and putting the human in your, you know, in your workforce at the center of whatever you're designing. So there's a lot that still needs to be done, I think, in terms of that employee experience and the employee value proposition, although I quite like that people call EVP a people promise much more these days, because I think that's kind of what it is, you know, what am I expecting from my people? What am I going to give you? You know, here's what I'm going to give you and here's what I'm expecting. And then that helps your recruitment strategies, because that's what people are signing up for. That's how you motivate people, because they've bought into it. So I think that's a couple of the other sort of skills that are needed, and that sort of leading and communicating through constant change, I think, is also just going to be essential for the future leader, the current leader.
God, there's so much to unpack in what you said. It's really interesting. So I wrote down single words to kind of remember. So I guess the first one, like I wrote down vision, but actually the question I have for you is about authentic, because that was one of the next things you said. So you said they have a vision. Obviously, I've got lots of thoughts on that from a communication perspective, and then business strategy, yeah, with you, obvious. But what about the authenticity? Like it's it's a word we use so much. I'm so aware it's such a sort of hackneyed term. It's almost cringeworthy, and yet I've been like, I can't find a better word, so I'm just sticking with it. But what does it mean to you in this context?
I think definitely walking the talk. So I mean, doing the things that you say you're going to do, being honest when things haven't gone the way that they should have done. So I think not covering up your mistakes, being able to say sorry when a sorry is required. I don't see that as a weakness. I mean, yes, it can be a showing vulnerability, but it's not necessarily a weakness. I think being able to be human yourself brings that level of authenticity with it. It's to say, look, I am also human. I also get things wrong. This is the route I thought we were going to take. I used my best judgment. I considered this carefully, but ultimately it hasn't worked out. So just being able to own those pieces, I think, and be who you say you are and do what you say you're going to do on a very consistent basis, I think is just required. When there's it feels, I think the thing that AI brings is a lack of trust in a lot of ways, because you don't know where things have come from. You're not quite sure if something is real or if it's deep fake, or and so employees in particular need something to hold on to that is genuine and real. And I think if the leader can be that, then they're filling that gap for their people.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. And I also, for me, what's interesting is those things that you've said, like we've got tools for. So I'm just like, oh yeah, this is why we get on and there's loads to talk about. So, for example, the like saying sorry. This was like actually one of my more recent tools. It's very funny. I love it. I love these silly names because they're very sticky. It's called the or apology tool, as in like an or that you row. And the concept is you're moving through something potentially a bit sticky. And the or is so the O is you, I have to remember it now. You own what happened. Sorry, the O is ownership. So you own it. So I did X, I'm really sorry. You acknowledge the impact on the other person. So I did X, I'm really sorry. I understand it was deeply upsetting for you because of X, Y, Z. And then you resolve. And since I've created it, I've had to make a few, the odd apology. And now I use it now, even in a text. But it's really powerful because otherwise, apologizing is so easy to end up feeling back-footed or like you didn't meet their needs and they're not happy with, all of that. So I think it's actually it's one of those things where we go, yeah, as a leader, to be authentic, you need to be able to put your hands up and be like, yeah, I screwed up, and I get that has had an impact on you and I'm really sorry about that. And this is what I'm going to do to resolve it. And it's actually, it's brilliant because I think it's things like that we don't think about very much, do we?
No, and it also brings about psychological safety. It brings the safety because if you think, oh, actually, if my leader can own their mistakes and apologize, then surely I can do the same. And that means I can raise difficult issues or things that are troubling me or, call out bad behavior somewhere else or whatever it is. So I think that's an amazing tool actually, but I think that really sets the tone. So
yeah, and I think it's a really, really interesting one. And I think about this a lot because I think there's this concept of what leadership should be, which is antiquated.
yes.
And yet it's kind of, it's like tar, like it kind of grips, it grips us. And certainly, before my epiphany, I referred to in the introduction, it had me you should be you should be quite hard and you should hide your feelings and never, ever, ever show, never cry. And that's not something I don't think I've cried in front of my team often. But I'm not ashamed of being oh, I'm feeling emotion or, and whereas before it'd be no, you've got to kind of know all the answers. Now I'm just I don't, when I don't know the answer, I'm I don't know the answer. And actually for me, I sat around with my team maybe 6 months ago and we were having an after work drink and I said, I'm going to record you. I want to know what you all love about working here. And there was really good vibe. So I literally shoved my iPhone in their face and I was expecting them to say each other because my people are just lovely. Our team's amazing. And I was expecting them to say the good we do. And what came up that totally surprised me was they were you as an authentic leader have made it safe to make mistakes and not be brilliant and like only get to there and like see that there's room to grow. And it was such a surprise because I was like, oh wow, like, so it's a really good thing, me kind of being authentic and sharing that I'm not good at everything. And when, you know, and so like that for me was a beautiful affirmation of actually the power of letting go of that antiquated concept of leadership, and instead embracing this kind of, like you say, the human being of it.
Yeah, where it plays out a lot actually at the moment is that, you know, everybody has innovation on their agenda somehow, like whether it's a value or it's baked into their strategy or something, they have that. And then, but if you really want to innovate, you have to have a culture where people are allowed to fail to some extent, because innovation is just about trying things, and not everything you try will be a success, right? That's that's just a numbers game. So you will try some things, they will not work out. Whether you call that a failure or a failed attempt or whatever it is, there needs to be scope for that to not go well. But if you have a blame culture in your organization, then you will never be able to innovate, because people will never feel like they can take that risk or take the chance or try something new. So sometimes I see these kind of, you know, polar opposites within one organization, and they're desperate to push innovation forward, and at the same time won't budge on this part of their culture that's blocking it. So,
So I think the growth mindset thing is really, really interesting. Like, it's interesting in every aspect. It's interesting in child rearing for those of us that are parents. But in terms of like creating a culture that is growth mindset is so key. And like I always say, like, it's not a mistake, it's an opportunity. As long as we learn from it, let's celebrate it, because this is great, because now we can, you know, it could have been worse if we hadn't got it this time, type thing. And I think that that's so important in terms of like answering this question, that creating a psychologically safe culture is creating one where people can innovate, which is where people can, you know, make mistakes. So true. I'm just going to bring up some, because we got very into authenticity. Just with that as well, like, it's lovely because we have tools. So we've got a couple of tools around that self-awareness piece. And I think a lot, you know, obviously I think a lot about this area generally, but about the secret shames that we have as people and that leaders have, where we kind of tuck them away. And that's the imposter syndrome thing, right? Yes. So you have these secret shames, and they just feel like shameful, so we don't look at them, and that creates a kind of, oh, I'll do this for show, I'll behave in a way that I think I should behave, because, you know, my real stuff of what if people don't like me, or what if I'm no good, or what if, you know, that imposter stuff, what if I'm not actually any good, I'm cheating, I shouldn't be here, and underneath that is these secret shames. And so we've got this tool which is called weakness alchemy. And the concept is you do an archaeological dig, and you're basically digging up these sort of the stuff that you're like, oh, I don't want anyone to know. And actually, that once you get it onto that kind of excavation table, you can then go, okay, I brought the light to it, and now I can alchemize that. I can turn these into opportunities for growth. I can turn these into either my own growth or bringing a solution in from outside. And I think that is an incredibly, like, because obviously we talk about authentic leadership, but it's like, how the hell do you get there? You know, and actually there are ways to get there. And, you know, a big one, we start with the journey when someone sort of wants to do this work by saying, right, we're gonna open up the lid, you know, we're gonna do this excavation, and then do, you know, bring them out onto the table. And then it's like, right, okay, I've got a terrible memory, or I'm too bullish, or I beat around the bush, or I'm too direct, whatever it is. And it's like, great, now let's alchemize that. Let's convert it. What are the opportunities here?
I'd love to do that. I don't know if you do it in team settings, but I'd love to do that in a top team setting if they felt safe enough to do it. Because I mean, there's a lot that we do with sort of personality profiling and leadership styles, and sometimes that's uncomfortable. But what you're talking about there is really the kind of the deep stuff. But if they felt comfortable and confident enough to share it, it would resolve so many top team issues almost instantly, I should imagine. If you're going, oh, you feel insecure about that, and I don't think I'm very good at this, and you know, it's it's a powerful.
We do it in groups. It's really powerful, and we do it alongside a tool called Secret Sauce, where there's a whole journey of working out your magic, and it kind of activates the right brain thinking. So you're not kind of going, oh, what am I really, what's my magic? What's my secret sauce? You actually sort of go there a roundabout way. And it's really amazing. Like Shri, our head of sales for B2B, just is so passionate. She's done it with all her friends, and her friends cry. She tells, it creates this amazing, epiphany moments, because it's like, oh, this is, yes, I've got these secret shames and now they're exposed, but actually this is what's wonderful and unique and to be celebrated. And so I think the two have to go together. But
we often say we try and get leaders to the eureka moment about when we're changing a culture, and we say, okay, these are the new behaviors that we want people to embody. This is what you've said you want. This maps to your values and your purpose and everything else. And when they have that eureka moment, that they realize actually it's also them that needs to change and embody the behaviors and the values, and that sort of, so that sounds like it might be a tool to get them there quicker as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So just coming back to the question, making sure, so the most important qualities that a leader needs to have in the modern workplace. I think for me, one of, like, when I'd looked at this question, and it's very similar to what you said with a different phrasing, I've said people need to feel valued and of value. So as a leader, that's your job. So it's like, right, how do I make people feel valued? Okay, I need to know how to listen. I need to have empathy. I need to create some kind of lateral structure so everybody feels like their contribution and their voice is important. So there's a kind of sort of culture piece there. And then obviously we've got tools, and I'm sure you've got thoughts in terms of how that works as well. And then in terms of value, it's like, well, they need to be aligned with the mission, kind of like what you were saying before, that vision. So that's the piece where the leader needs to know how to inspire and needs to know how to, share their vision through storytelling and presentation and town halls, etc. So I would add, those skills, and it's very similar. It's just very similar to what you've said. Like, how do you share your vision? How do you create empathy? And for us, we've got lots of listening tools, and sort of we've got an acknowledgement tool of, like, how do you actually recognize someone in a public setting in a way that is really going to be like giving them this kind of, oh yes, I've been seen, I've been recognized. That's called the Sunflower tool, which I love.
I always think it's a shame when you get really sort of visionary leaders that can see the future and have a great sort of idea and a sense of where they want to be, but they can't bring people on the journey with them, or they're not able to sort of articulate it. So because that is part of it. That's part of the leadership.
Like with us, and I'll sort of give everyone watching just a little, for those of you who don't know, I'm very free with a lot of our tools, I guess most of them, because I want to help. So this one, the simplest way to share your vision is what we call the meal plan tool. So when you've got a presentation, you have your protein, which is like your meat, the meat of it. What is your objective? What are the 3 things you want people to take away? That is common sense. The next bit is your vegetables, and those are the nourishment, and those are your values. So that is, right, why does this matter to me personally? So that's about getting your heart involved, of like, this is why I care about this. Now, if a leader is speaking about something they genuinely don't care about it, like they can't connect it with any values, there's a problem. Like, they're just, but actually you can always, because you're living, you're breathing, so you can always find a way to connect it to what matters to you. And that's so important, because when you're sharing that, you get buy-in and you get trust. So that's the vegetables piece. And then the final piece is the umami, or the spice. And that's about sort of sprinkling this presentation meal with your unique perspective, your stories, your anecdotes, your personality. And actually, like, for people watching this, if you want to think about sharing your vision, just go for that. Like that's the simplest, little formula to basically get that depth of sharing your vision. And anyone can do it. And the thing that people miss is, oh, I should just do a presentation that's kind of chin up. And it's like, well, actually, if you're doing chin up, you're only going to ever get, and you should only get, chin up from other people, i.e. their heart is not going to be connecting. They're not going to be inspired. Whereas if you do, like, right, I'm going to go from the gut up, you've got, I'm going to share some of my heart, some of what matters. You get not just the mind connection, you get the heart connection.
Yeah, love that.
Thanks. Okay, I'm aware we're on to next question time now, so let's bring it up. So in the quest for building a sound organizational culture, how do we effectively bridge the gaps when 70% of our workforce are hybrid and half of those are fully offsite? Jo, would you like to?
Yes, okay, that's a good one. Well, I think a sound organizational culture in essence doesn't change whether you're all on the same site or you have large percentage of people who are off-site. You still want that strong articulation of what the culture is. You still want the alignment throughout the organization. The purpose has to be clear. The top team have to be aligned. You have all of those good things that are there. So that doesn't change. The other thing that doesn't change is that strong sense of the culture as an experience. How does that manifest in the way that employees experience it? How well does communication really work? And by which I mean multi-directional communication, not just a top-down broadcast, which I think was one of the things I saw when we went into lockdown in particular, that it was very much this kind of just blasting people with comms, which obviously doesn't work. You need to hear what they're thinking. You need to know what else is going on. You need to change your messaging depending on what you're doing. And the other piece that forms the culture is really the scaffolding that holds it in place around the edge. So the structures, the systems, the processes, the skills. And again, I come back to my innovation piece of you want to innovate, but you have so much red tape that you can't move anything forward. So those things are kind of the foundation block, if you like. I think in the hybrid situation, one of the pieces that people haven't done since, or as they've moved or morphed into hybrid, is reset their culture. So, hybrid is essentially a strategy change. And with a strategy change comes a culture change, right? So what you had as a culture before, whether it worked or it didn't work, it's going to be different for hybrid working. It's much, my perspective is much harder to manage in a hybrid world, and managers still aren't equipped. They definitely weren't when we went into COVID, but they're still not equipped to really manage it. And so now there's a lot of upskilling going on. We certainly see our hybrid manager courses really flying because it's still not being dealt with. So that kind of communication needs to be clearer, greater clarity on what you're expecting. Delegation needs to be more structured. We've literally put it into a number of simple processes recently because people are like, I need to delegate, but I think I'm delegating, but I don't get back from my people what I was expecting. So you go, well, you're not delegating very well then. So let's break it down. What does it look like? Where are the checkpoints? What do you need to see? Are you delegating the end result, or are you trying to delegate the process? Because that's not going to work. Everybody has their own way of doing things, right? So upskilling those leaders in that. Well-being needs to be more consciously monitored, right? If you can't see people at all, if they're off site for all of that time and you don't pick up on any visual cues or anything physical, you don't necessarily their eyes close up or whatever, you can't tell on a Zoom call, whatever it is, are you proactively asking the right questions? Are you managing it? Are you what are you doing? Connectedness just takes more time. It's just a lengthier process than it would be if you were sitting next to somebody. And then some structural changes as well, just because managing hybrid teams has become, it's just more difficult, it's more time consuming, you need better skills to do it. We've seen a lot of teams become smaller or change structure, or just because it's not possible to manage the same number of people typically that you would do if you were all sitting together. So things like that definitely have changed. And the last piece is really, probably people will hate me for saying this, but it's about the metrics and the KPIs. That how are you measuring the culture? How are you measuring people's perspective or perception of the experience? What have you, how do you know it's going well? Because if you know real time, you can do something about it. If you only find out in an annual survey, it's kind of too late. So just, finding little, and I don't mean, by the way, sometimes when I say that about hybrid, people think I mean like surveillance tech. That is absolutely not what I mean. I don't believe in that at all. Don't subscribe to that. But it's very much on the kind of what's really going on for people, what's working, what's not working, how can we keep our culture alive? And obviously within that, lots of, the moments that matter, from an experience perspective, how do we get people together physically to do the things that really are much better done in the physical environment in real life, or how do we create better experiences online or in a remote or virtual way that really speak to people. But again, it takes thought, it takes effort, and it's about putting that in, I think.
And is that something that you put in with your clients, where you do
Yeah,
bespoke?
absolutely. And it seems like something that people are more focused on now than they have been for the last couple of years. We've done some really comprehensive people promises and employee experience blueprints where they're really looking at the moments that matter. What are those moments? And it's not just like your classic, oh, let's go around the employee life cycle, yes, pre-hire, hire, induction, blah blah. It's actually, well, what else is going on for these people? What does what do their own life events look like? How can we make that meaningful, in a hybrid world? What is their, what's their persona? What's their employee persona? What type of employee are they? What do they want out of life? How do we change what we offer to those people to make that an enjoyable experience? Because it isn't a one size fits all, right? So which can be tricky from from an employer perspective, can be tricky, but it's about being able to flex as much as possible to say, yes, this experience of working wherever I'm based is good for me.
I love that. It's so comprehensive what you've gone through. And I think, yeah, the idea, I particularly like just sort of pulling out a couple of the ideas, but the idea of looking at like making sure that you're doing the metrics and measuring, so you're not making assumptions of like, oh, everybody's really happy. It's like, well, actually, let's measure it. Let's look for where we can actively improve, because that's important, because that's knowledge, right? So I love that. And also that the solution is not bombarding people with comms. Like, it's not like, oh, well, we just need to talk a lot, and because that can be very overwhelming. And I think also that bespoke thing of making sure, like, for some people, attention is exactly what they want, and for others it's not, and making sure that you're going, okay, I need to understand the human in front of me so that I can make sure that they feel welcome and connected, rather than thinking en masse. And that's really important.
And I think that's the thing about don't just survey for the sake of survey. Don't just ask questions. So, what end point are you trying to get to? What is it you're actually measuring? I don't want to get too geeky, but a lot of my team are organisational psychologists and cultural anthropologists and stuff. So they're coming from a research background. So it's sometimes you can ask the wrong question, or you can elicit a response that kind of makes you think that everything is okay, but it's not necessarily okay. So you have to be quite, I don't want to say scientific, but you have to be quite structured on making sure you're asking the right thing to get the answer that you actually need. So
yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. I've got a few thoughts as well for this question. So one, we have some of our team are actually fully remote, and so getting the feedback from them that they love it and love coming to work and feel totally part of it is like, yay, we're winning. I think that for us, we do something interesting, which is part of some of our courses if people want it, but it's not always there. And it's a communication charter. And so we basically get every individual to fill in this charter of their communication style and what works for them and what they like and don't like. And that's really, really useful. And then there's a sharing process that goes on. So that's an amazing thing to do in terms of making sure you're adjusting to that individual and not making an assumption. So an interesting one, we're organizing our team social, and for Christmas, our Christmas social. And we get all our coaches to come on board. And I was like, right, everybody needs to come. You've got to, if you can't, I need an amazing excuse. And someone came back to me and said, well, actually, like they left me a voice memo, and she was just like, I so appreciate you're doing it. I love it. But for me, it's just very, very overwhelming. And I've stopped going to big group things because that doesn't work for me. And so, even though I've loved it when I've come before, it's actually left me like I've had to recover for a day. And it was beautiful. And I was just like, thank you so much for sharing with such, she's a communication coach. She's brilliant at it. So, but with such grace and care and authenticity. And it was really interesting to me to be like, yes, of course, like that is an amazing thing for some people, but for others, it's not. And actually that, a truly respectful workplace that supports people is going to be checking in to be like, this gift I'm giving you, do you love it or hate it? Rather than I love it, so you're going to love it.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's the same with a lot of the sort of socials that involve alcohol as well. Like that's a huge shift that we've seen, even just in the last 18 months, of how can we still do something that really gets people together, allows them to let their hair down. It can be really fun and does not involve alcohol. And actually, people find that harder than you'd imagine. So.
Yeah, and we did some great things during the pandemic. I think we did one thing which was super sweet, where we said, right, everybody's got a budget to buy themselves any kind of meal. And then we're going to have a meal together, the meal, and we're going to share what we bought with our budget. And it was just this really lovely thing of everyone being like, I bought pickles, or whatever it was. So yeah, and everybody sharing their meal. I think just a couple of things probably to share from how we approach it, and it's less within the tools that we teach, and more within what we do as a company. But they really work, and I'm very passionate about them. So we probably got a couple of things that I'll share. One is we do our Monday and Wednesday morning huddles, which is pretty commonplace. But at the beginning, we start with moments of joy. I think that came through reading I'd done about positive psychology, and the more you're noticing and aware and have those moments of gratitude and joy, you're rewiring your brain. So I was like, this is coming in, it's super quick. So it's sort of a 30-second, and you do it before your plan for the week. And that is, I think, one of the key reasons why our culture is so lovely, because everybody gets once or twice a week to experience other people's real life and real joyfulness. And apart from the fact it sets you off just going, oh, I love this team, I love life. But it's also like, sometimes people are like, I don't have it. My apple, I crunched into my apple. And other times it's like this most beautiful joy. But it's you get to connect. So that's a real special kind of thing that I'd love to share with everybody here. Doesn't need to take too long. And then another one that we do is our Friday checkout. And that is where you basically say something that went well, something that you're proud of, and a shout out to someone else. And I think quite a few companies do this. The power of it for us, it's like just this sort of fuzzy feel good, emojis fly. It's just an absolute delight. And I think that making the time for moments like that, where you bring the humanity in, like so crucial, and a lot of the time forgotten, but actually, they come back, in like tenfold and more in terms of like feel good, well-being, productivity, joy. So those are some things that we do.
That sounds amazing.
Great. I think we probably should go to our Q&A time, actually. I think we've got like a last question here, and let's do it really quickly because I want to leave time for everybody. So everybody, if you are listening, you've got questions for me or Joe, please start putting them in the chat. But we'll do a very quick one of just like, do you have a little case study? So here we go. The ROI of good culture and communication. Do you have any case studies that show how improvements to soft skills drive hard results? So Joe, do you have a quick one?
Yes, we have lots on our website. So, but very quickly, one of our award-winning ones was with Mortgage Advice Bureau, and that was an end-to-end culture change program. But from that, we saw employees were 2.5 times more likely to recommend Mortgage Advice Bureau as a place to work. There was an 83% improvement to communication, which is their kind of internal net promoter score. At the end of the project, 94% of the employees felt aligned to the purpose, the vision, and the values. So there was some real there were improvements in customer service metrics, etc. What I would say about ROI, I mean, actually, we're asked this a lot at the moment. I think it's because the market is so tight. I would say just look very specifically, one, into your company, but also into your sector and industry. So some of the sort of gender balance improvements that we've made, for example, might not be possible in every sector. We moved one from, I can't remember what it was now, 70-30 to, well, I'd have to remember it again, to 58-42. So it just kind of, those kinds of big pieces, or is it more about social impact, or is it, or what's possible? So yes, mortgage advice. And then if people want the numbers, they always want the hard numbers. It was 27% revenue. That's what your CEO probably wants to know about, to let you let you do the project, and profitability was up 36%. So tell them that.
I love it. Amazing. Brilliant. So yeah, I think for us, we've got like loads of stats, and we've worked with amazing clients. So we've done sort of, work with John Lewis and Chanel and Google and etc. So that's wonderful. I'm going to pick a fun one. We do have case studies, but I'm just going to pick a fun one, and that was we worked with the Korean Winter Olympic team. And Korean Winter Olympic pitch team or bid team. So basically, they had lost the bid to host the Winter Olympics twice in a row, and the president had asked the most powerful businessman of Korea, Chairman Cho, to take it on and bloom him win, like a third time lucky. And so somehow they found us. This was a number of years ago. And I started working with the bid team, but then directly with Chairman Cho. And it was really interesting working with him. He was amazing. But he, when I was flown out to Korea, and like literally when he walked into the room, like 100 people just bowed. And I was like, okay, not intimidated at all, slightly jet lagged. So then I worked with him, and he flew to London and then worked with me in my office, and I got him lying on the floor visualizing his childhood, because basically he was sort of robotic. He wasn't bringing in any emotion. That wasn't the cultural norm. So he was talking about the Winter Olympics, and I was like, there's no why, there's no passion, there's no heart. We've got to go deep. And so I sort of went into this, went off piste and did sort of childhood vision work. And the work I did with him got this emotional quality and this for his culture, like very unusual. And they went on and they won the bid. And it was interesting. I read the notes from the judges, which was like, he brought this quality of passion and care. And so like that's a really sort of big scale, but that's the difference this work makes, because we're humans. Like that's why we have a film like Hollywood, like people care. And if you're able to bring out your humanity, then and this is both as a leader, but as a colleague, as an employee as well. Like humanity is really what drives these big organizations, and if you can bring that out as well as the kind of productivity, you get results. It's a kind of no-brainer. So that's it. I think it's quite a fun one. I think we're ready for questions. So here we go. How can all employees take shared responsibility for culture and not just senior leadership? From Sri Thakkar. And what are some daily practices we can all do to maintain a positive company culture? So Jo, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, definitely. So I think this piece again is about the clearly articulating and the alignment. It has to be everyone's responsibility. It has to be that piece that's brought in. So I think the understanding what the culture is, what's expected from you, how does it manifest in your daily life? Because if it's just something that sticks as the sort of, it's in a brochure, it's on the wall, or here's a few random values, it's not really being lived. Part of what we do, one of our strengths probably, is in the whole embedding phase. So it's that, how do you move culture out of a project phase and into business as usual as quickly as possible? And that is about bringing it into your daily life, your daily work life. So we tend to upskill managers on the work that they're, to take the work that they're already doing or that their people are already doing and apply the new culture lens to it, or the culture lens if it's not new, what it is that you want the desired culture to be, and take it into your daily work. So it's not a sort of abstract separate thing. So you're saying to people, okay, collaboration is a core value for us. How have we actually brought that to life? Where have we got stuck? Where have we got examples where we didn't collaborate very well, or somebody else in the organization didn't collaborate very well with us? Where is it breaking down? And kind of understanding those, almost micro level then interventions that are going on to say, no, this is our responsibility. But again, I think that comms piece of the bottom up comms, in terms of those people being able to say where it's not working, is also key. What was the bottom piece of that question? Was that
And what are some daily practices we can all do to maintain a positive culture?
Well, I liked your one about the joy, but I think it depends what it is that you're bringing in. So if it's just that it's positive as opposed to it's aligned to the strategy type piece, I think the more silos you can break down, the more interaction your people can have, the more they're given agency to drive parts of that forward. That's why they say to people who work in, John Lewis or Pret or wherever, you have agency to give free things away to certain clients in this, because they're allowing them to demonstrate that they are also responsible for the culture. They are also part of it. So it's that type of thing, whatever is appropriate for your organization. How can I make a difference that's in line with the culture? And no one's asking me to do that. And I'm not doing it for any kind of ulterior motive other than this is another way to embed these practices day to day.
I love that. I and particularly love the John Lewis Pratt example. It's like, actually, how can, I think a lot of what you said comes from the leadership in terms of empowering the team to do this, to maintain that positive company culture. And I think for me, like I agreed with what you said. I think the main thing I'd probably add is about authenticity, and like to crack into that, for people to take responsibility of what's going on for them and to be able to articulate that upwards or sideways in a way that is kind and respectful, but productive and honest. So, if they're not happy with something, and that obviously is such a skill, like that's where we come in with, like, how do you actually do it? How can you do upward feedback? But it's like, but actually it's so important to be able to be like, oh, even if it's, I don't understand this task, it's fine. It's being, rather than being like, oh God, my manager gives me tasks and I never get, I never understand them. It's like, right, take responsibility, because actually you are empowered. However, it is dependent to some extent on, there's a balance of, like, if you have an empowered culture, then it's much easier to be like, right, you also need to, step into that fully. If you have a disempowering culture, then there's hopefully some kind of butterfly effect. And we work kind of top down, bottom up as well. Like in our B2C, we're like working with individuals. So it's like, you're all we have. We're going to give you the tools to try and impact change around you as well as for yourself. But I would say that would be my big thing.
Yeah. And I think that piece where we're often looking at the, we're changing behavior, we're changing mindset, we're changing ways of working, to make it positive or to make it more positive. So being able to call out as an employee, as an individual, being able to call out where you see that not happening, again, in a positive way, not in a nasty kind of shaming and blaming way, but actually, I don't think this matches where we're trying to be as an organization. That's the kind of, again, the steps to making it positive overall.
Yeah. And I think also there's I remember a few years ago, like having a difficult period in my business and feeling like everyone expected me to be superhuman. And I think it was, I wasn't sharing my load. So, that was sort of my responsibility as well. But I was like, have empathy for me too, because I am just a human being as well. And it's got to go always. Like, I want to respect you and I want to care for you and I want you to feel psychologically safe. But like, give me something back. And I think that is it, like the senior leadership. And I think, Shri alludes to this in the question, like, are just humans too. And often with, their, increased pressure and a push, especially if it's a larger company and there's boards and stakeholders, it's like, a push to achieve numbers can be incredibly like threatening on one's psyche. And actually being able to hold, have empathy, and a lot of our tools around, like, how do you develop empathy so that you can go, okay, they're going through X, Y, Z, and yes, they're rude or it's annoying, but actually let me also think about what's going on for them. That's kind of the 5%.
Yeah. And I think it's about, when I'm coaching, sometimes I talk about keeping it just within the bandwidth, like show those emotions, it's fine to be up and to be down, but I think you just keep it within a range that employees can accept is, is okay, right? So it's not kind of, flying from one extreme to the other.
Yeah. Okay, let's bring up the next question. We'll be a bit speedier on this one so we can get through a few minutes. So how does your model fit in with companies such as mine that are 100% virtual? Interesting. We are worldwide, but only meet on Zoom. So I'll sort of start with this. I would say that for me, Graham, it's about putting in some of those key structures that allow for the human as well as the worker and their KPIs. And so, once you've done that, you're finding a way to get their voice. And you can't just be like, oh, open door policy, tell me, just feel free to share, because people won't. People are not going to share their humanity just like that. So it needs to be done in quite a structured way, like the moments of joy or the shout out to someone else, or, a concrete structure that allows them to share a bit of them within the structure of the working week. And it needs to be as regular of, like, I would say, if you're 100% remote, I would say minimum twice a week, but you probably want more, and maybe daily touch points of like just those little processes that allow for the human to come forth and feel safe. So that would be my kind of top level speedy answer. What about you, Jo?
Yeah, super speedy. I think, for me, it's all about the intentional design. So you design the culture and the employee experience that you want for 100% virtual, and whatever that means for that population, and bring that to life. So if it's more interaction that they need, more time on screen, videos on, more one-to-one phone calls because actually they don't feel safe in large group situations, or whatever it is, still celebrating moments that matter with those people, even though you've never met them in person, whatever it is, whatever that design looks like, it's being intentional in the design that's gonna work for the population.
Great, lovely question. Next question, please. So Judith Richards is asking, how can leaders deal with a situation where in Zoom meetings with their cameras off and you have the impression they're multitasking or not fully engaged? No, I actually do this at times, so hard with multi-location hybrid work online. So I just realized the time, we're 58 minutes past. So while we answer this question, in fact, I want everybody to be focusing fully, but I also want a point where people can say what their takeaways are from this 1 hour. So we're going to blast it with a 30-second response to this, and then let's leave some time for everybody to share their takeaways. So over to you, Jo.
I probably have more questions than I have answers. I think it's one of those things where it's do they know that they're how that impacts on everybody else, that they're there? Could you shorten the time of the call and say, can I have 20 minutes of focused attention if you're behind on your emails and have to do something else? I think sometimes just making it quicker, everybody ruthlessly prioritizing what they need to talk about on that particular call, and getting that done. I still think it's seen as pretty rude to do it, but we all do it somehow. So I think it's kind of maybe being a little bit more honest, being a bit more transparent, and again, giving the feedback. I'm not really comfortable with this. How about we find a better solution? And that might be a shorter call, more focused, get the job done, and then you can crack on with your emails offline.
Yeah, I would say with that is absolutely ask people to have their cameras on. If that's not possible, then you engage with questions and you use the chat function. But you also say, I really want you to be listening. I really don't want you to be multitasking. So please stay with me. And if there's anything I can do to make sure that you're with me and not multitasking, let's communicate about that. But just bring the elephant into the room is what I'd say.
Yeah.
So brilliant.
Yeah,
point. Right. So I'd love for you all in the final minute, anyone who wants you to share their takeaway, because it's so interesting for us to hear sort of what what you've got out of this wonderful webinar. I've really enjoyed doing it with you. Thank you so much, Jo. It's been
likewise. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. So so let's see if any comments. So Judith, actually, thank you, has said, one of my takeaways is the ideas around having structured sharing in huddles. Yeah, moments of joy. That's great. Lovely, wonderful, practical and succinct. Thank you, Kathleen. So a few coming through. So yeah, I think it's 2:00. Please keep putting your comments through. We'll leave this open for a bit, but just to say again, Jo, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm really looking forward to more of our conversations offline as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.